Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Freeston, Director of Quality Improvement at the Early Years Alliance, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session on preparing for Ofsted in 2021. I'm joined this evening by my colleague, Quality and Standards Manager, Melanie Pilcher. Can you say hello, please, Melanie?
Good evening, everybody.
And it's our pleasure to welcome you to this session, the last Alliance webinar in the national series of 2020, and what a year this has been. We thought it was appropriate to focus on what we can all expect across the sector in terms of Ofsted inspections in 2021 with recent announcements. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all with us. As is always the case, we will record this session, and it will be available on the Alliance's YouTube site, hopefully from Friday, probably mid-afternoon Friday, if not before. And we will also share the slides to everybody who is registered. So please don't spend all of your time trying to write everything down. So this is very much your session. If you have questions, please do drop them into the box, and they will pop up on my screen, and I try discreetly to weave them into the conversation as Melanie progresses through the slides. I have a couple of comments, and this happens on a number of occasions. If you're getting problems with sound, it's very kindly where people have said it's gone quite quiet, that usually is at the recipient's end. So I will put a note in to just say that if people are saying that they can hear me, that would be great, because then I can say to Linda, for example, here, that actually the issue might be at your side, Linda. 6 o'clock is often a difficult time just because of the number of people who are streaming TV, etc. And it is one of the bugbears. But again, we do record these. Sessions, so do please look at the YouTube site to get if you miss anything. Right, let's move quickly on. Hopefully you can all see the slides. The aims of today's session. It's to basically give an outline of Ofsted's future plans for inspection and the regulation of early years and childcare settings. We're all experienced practitioners, but obviously things have been changing and there are announcements on a regular basis from Ofsted, so it just seemed timely to have an opportunity to bring everybody up to speed so they feel confident as they go into the new year. To consider the actions that early years and childcare providers can take to prepare themselves for an interim visit, an assurance inspection, and the return to routine graded inspections. I've already had some questions pop up about assurance inspections, Melanie, so you were right to focus on this, and we'll take it on from there. Just by way of background, however, before I pass over to Melanie for the updates on where we are, it just seemed a useful opportunity to remind everybody that it was only a couple of weeks ago that HMCI, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector, Amanda Spielman, published the latest annual report from Ofsted, which covers the 2018-19 academic year. So this is the situation as to the end of August 2019. And we just thought it was timely to just give some of the headlines that come from that report. And you can find it download on the site of www.ofsted.org.uk, I think it is, or is it gov? I think it might be gov, actually.
.gov.uk.
.gov, sorry, everybody. So just the picture as a whole, 49,800, I do apologize, that's my Alexa buzzing there. Alexa, stop. Sorry, there is something's going to burn in the cooker now. Of 49,000 registered providers had received a full inspection. There are 11,400 mostly new providers that had not yet received their first inspection. And I think that's a tellingly large amount, that there's still 11,000 new settings. 96% of early years registered providers were good or outstanding, and this is a continuation of the increase on previous year. And when you look back to the figure by comparison of 2015, when we were at 85% good or outstanding, I think that's a real credit to the sector as a whole, that the continuation of improvements to good and outstanding has been maintained at a time when obviously you know that it's not the easiest environment in terms of finances and the future of the sector going forward. A small number of nursery schools, 63% were judged outstanding. Of the 10% sample of childcare registered providers, 86% met the requirements of registration. And the number of childminders judged outstanding has gone from 16 to 17%, which again is a tremendous outcome. Key messages. Early years registered providers grades requires improvement or inadequate. The main weaknesses happens. How many years have we been doing these, Melanie?
Too long.
Leadership and management is the key area where settings fall down, and Melanie will address that as we go forward. And also the personal development, behaviour and welfare elements are those which generally come up as the issues which requires improvement or inadequate judgments. There's a continuing decline in the number of childminders since 2011, 2012. I think we're in the region of about a 25–30% reduction in the number of registered childminders, and that is clearly a structural concern that we have across the sector. And again, whilst the number of providers has fallen, there is stability in the number of places available. And I think that's, again, there's a whole webinar in that issue in terms of how the structure of the sector is changing with the introduction of larger provision, but fewer providers around. 76,200 providers as at the 31st of August 2019, and again that's a fall of 13%, but as I say, most of that is childminders, but also the number of places is remaining fairly stable. Right, I've had a few questions come in. I'll read those while I hand over to Melanie and weave them in. Melanie, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I'm expecting quite a lot of questions this evening, so you're going to have your finger on the button there, Michael, I think. Okay, so the current situation then, just to sort of bring us all up to speed of where we are really. Routine graded inspections, as you will know, will remain on hold for the spring term. So between now and April, those routine graded inspections are frozen. As of the September 2020 to December 2020, so until now, interim visits will continue, and I'll touch on interim visits very briefly because chances are that with only really a couple of weeks left of December where we'll be working, the chances are that anybody that was due to have an interim visit would have had one by now. And then on the 7th of December, Ofsted announced plans for the spring term. So commencing January 2021, we will have the introduction of the assurance inspections, and I'm going to spend some time talking about those and explaining those to you. And they have also announced that routine graded inspections will resume in the summer term, and that will be commencing April 2021. And at that time, as they resume those graded inspections, the routine inspections, this is where the launch of the 6-year window for routine inspections will come into force from then as well. I will say though, of course, it's a dynamic situation. Things could still change, but as it stands, we're expecting those inspections to recommence fully from April. Yes, Michael.
I think that's a timely point because it just links to a couple of the initial questions that have come in from people. From Barbara, for example, when does the Ofsted cycle for inspections begin, please? Is it academic or calendar years? As it is, I've been 6 years since she's seen now. I should be March 2021. So roughly where does that leave me? And I think your point about fluidity of the cycle may impact on Barbara's situation, mightn't it?
Yes, it will. And Ofsted have said that when they suspended inspections back in March, as they pick up the inspection cycle again, it will just be as if the clock stopped in March. So they will pick up from where they would have been in March. Now, if you've been 6 years without an inspection, then in terms of the new window for routine inspections, you're likely to be one of the earlier ones. But I'll talk to you in a moment about how those inspections are going to be prioritised.
Fine. Just a couple of other comments on the cycle from Sharon. I have a colleague who was not inspected in the 16 to 20 cycle. Is she likely to have an assurance inspection, or will it be a graded inspection in the summer? Again, it's not exactly an exact science, Sharon, but as we talk through, we can prepare your colleague for either, I think is probably the way we would say it.
Yes. And again, as I talked to you about how the assurance inspections will be prioritised, I think you'll see, you should be able to make a fair guess as to where you will come in the cycle.
Right. From Suzanne, just the last one, if people don't mind, and then we'll move us on. I'm awaiting my first inspection and very nervous of the assurance and inspections. If I have an assurance visit, should I then expect a full inspection in the summer? Do we know? And then it's a question about priority issues. So it's the relationship between the assurance ones and the full inspections, Melanie.
Yes, and Ofsted have been a little bit vague about this, but I would imagine that your routine inspection will take account of your assurance inspection, but it does not, your assurance inspection does not replace what would be your routine scheduled inspection. So if you're due a routine scheduled inspection from April, then you will have it as planned.
And I'll just take the last one here, just because Millicent allows me very timely to say the bit that Melanie was keen that I dropped in at some point. I had my inspection in 2017 and was due in February 2020. When would we inspect them? My stock line to whenever I do sessions on this, Millicent, is it doesn't matter when they come, because your preparation will allow you to be Ofsted ready should they drop in tomorrow. There you go, Melanie.
Absolutely.
I said I'd get to it, and we'll support you through that process as we go through today's session, Millicent.
Hopefully we will. Yes, of course we will. I think it's not so much about having to do any extra preparations. I think you just have a slightly different emphasis on some of the things that you would normally be doing. So hopefully I'll cover that again as we go through. Michael, if you can move on for me. So just a brief recap on the interim visits, and I'd be interested to know if anybody wants to type in if they've actually had an interim visit. It'd be nice to know how you got on with that. But the situation with the interim visits, they prioritise those settings that were requires improvement or inadequate with actions at their last inspection. And also those settings where actions were set at the last inspection for a breach of any safeguarding and welfare requirements, or where your re-inspection date may have passed. No inspection judgment was given for these interim visits, but a written report was made available, and the rationale being that you could then use this written report to show to parents or perhaps to show the local authority, because of course any setting that would have been sitting on inadequate or requires improvement, there is an impact of that in terms of sometimes local authorities withholding funding. So that was the situation with the interim visits, but I think we can say goodbye to those really now.
Just a couple of, Diana's asked, I'm new to all of this. What's an assurance inspection? Hold on, Diane, we will get there in a second. Being new to this isn't there, they're new to all of us in that situation.
They certainly are. Okay,
so am I right in taking, just make this clear to me, if you've had an assurance visit, and if you've had an interim visit, it doesn't change your status in terms of the overall judgment. That still goes back to your previous full inspection, but you will have a cover letter that explains where you are at the date of the interim. Is that correct?
Yes, and because what Ofsted would focus on in the interim visits is how you've addressed any actions that were set at your last inspection. So
Right.
it's
Okay.
it's really just
That's
about
right.
compliance. Okay.
Anna has said that they had an interim one. I trust it went well, Anna. If there's anything in just a couple of words you'd say that it was a good experience or not, then I'd like to share that with everybody if that's possible, if you don't
That
mind.
would be useful
Do
for
you need,
us as well.
do you need me to move
Okay,
on?
please do. So here we come then. This is the one, this is the biggie. This is the word on everybody's lips now, isn't it? The assurance inspection. So these will take place as it stands at the moment from January until April, so during spring term. And the purpose of these assurance inspections is to find out what it is like for children in their early years setting, to seek assurance that providers continue to meet requirements to remain on the early years register and, if applicable, on the childcare register. The assurance inspections will result in a report that informs and reassures parents about what is happening in their child's setting. So in a similar way to what the interim visits did, but obviously there's a little more depth and a little more purpose to the assurance inspection. So if we move on again, Michael.
Sorry, I will just put, Kilner has sent through very helpfully that they had an interim visit and it was all based on the actions left at the last inspection they had.
Yes,
They did not look at the
absolutely.
learning and development actions, but were
No,
still able to listen to what you have done since. So thank you, Kilner, that's very helpful.
absolutely. And just to say with the assurance inspections as well, that inspectors will refer to part 2 of the inspection handbook, and they will consider the criteria against the 4 key judgments in the usual way. But they will also have, and this is a really important 2 words here, due regard to the limitations that the pandemic may have caused. But I'm quite happy to take questions on that, and I'll try and expand on that a little further as we move on as well.
Fine.
So if we can just move on again.
So interesting, just one comment from me. Whilst the insurance inspections may be wrong, that initial phrase of what is it like for a child in this early years setting is a fundamental principle of inspections from all of Ofsted's potential, isn't it?
Always,
Putting themselves
always.
into that situation. What's it like for a child in this setting?
Yeah, and Ofsted were always very clear that, you know, that keeping the child at the heart of the inspection process, that's got to be the big question. Okay, so providers must demonstrate during an assurance inspection how they meet the learning and development requirements, if appropriate. So there are 2 reasons why if appropriate is there. One is obviously if you're on the childcare register, then you do not have to meet those requirements, but you have due regard to them. And also, if you have applied, or if you're in an area that's perhaps in tier 3 and there are restrictions on how you're operating that mean you can't deliver the learning and development requirements fully. In other words, if you are taking advantage of the disapplications and modifications to the EYFS, then Ofsted will take that into account when they conduct your assurance inspection.
Can I just interrupt there,
Yes.
Melanie, please? That just links back to a question that Joanna asked, and I thought I'd share it with everybody. What is the state of the disapplications at the moment?
Yeah, if you are in an area that due to the pandemic, because let's face it, we've got tier 3s, we've got tier 2s, you know, we're still in the middle of this pandemic, and
in Cornwall, tier 1.
And in Cornwall tier 1, yes. Then if you are still, if you are unable to operate as you normally would because of the pandemic, then those disapplications and modifications apply. But it's really important, Michael, that everybody looks at the disapplications and modifications guidance, because it is being updated and tweaked as we go along. And so I think it's really important that people refer directly back to that guidance. But I'm going to talk about the disapps and the mods again in a moment. I've been looking for a way to shorten that phrase for weeks now. So disapps and mods from here in. Yes,
just a
thank
couple
you.
of questions on the technicalities, and something I hadn't thought about. Lynn, is an assurance inspection by phone or in person?
It will depend. Ofsted have said that throughout this process, they will take advice from Public Health England on what they should and shouldn't be doing. So in some instances, because they will the whole approach is a risk-based approach. And in some instances, they may conduct your inspection by phone.
Okay, great.
But
And then the other one, sorry.
Yeah, it will be based on a risk assessment.
Fine. And the second one that's linked to the phone, will they still call you beforehand? Do you get the warning phone call, or will it be unannounced?
No. In part 1 of the inspection handbook, it's exactly the same criteria. The way they will inform you of the inspection, the things that they will talk to you about in that phone call, the things that they might want to see, the information they will want you to give them will remain exactly the same.
Smashing, thank you. I'm completely lost on where we are on this slide. Do you want me to move on?
Luckily. No,
right,
no,
okay.
Stay where we are.
Right.
So you will also have to meet the safeguarding and welfare requirements, of course, and there were, as you know, there were some disapplications and modifications to the safeguarding and welfare requirements, mainly around things like first aid certificates and some ratio which you can relax your ratios anyway, but there were some things around ratios and so on. So just have a look at that and make sure that you're up to speed on what those disaps and modifications currently are. Okay. Develop and deliver the educational programs, again, if appropriate, for the same criteria that I mentioned earlier. Identify children's starting points and ensure they make progress in their learning and development, again, if appropriate. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on as well. So, but these are all things that would be familiar to you. These are all things that you'd have to demonstrate anyway. And if we move on again, Michael.
No, you don't get away that easily. I've got a couple of questions on this, but the relationship between interim and assurance, and I'll just take these at random. From Beverly, are assurance inspections only being undertaken for settings who previously received requires improvement or inadequate? And we've had a successful interim visit where we passed our actions. This is from Bianca, well done.
Yeah.
From our previous, will we have an assurance assessment as well, or would we be waiting for the normal routine inspections to start from April?
Whew, my goodness. Okay, I'll try and take that a bit at a time. You're not likely to be prioritised for an assurance inspection if your interim visit was satisfactory and if Ofsted were happy that you were now working towards fully or meeting those actions that were set against you. But again, because this is a risk-based approach, Ofsted will make those decisions as and when. And I think as we move on, you'll see how Ofsted are going to prioritise these. So I think I'll probably be able to answer the rest of the question when we move on.
And that answers Tracy's point, because she's saying, will all settings get an assurance inspection? You can pretty much be sure that will not. Sorry, carry on, Miss Melanie.
Yeah, they will, according to that risk-based approach. So they're going to prioritise.
Yeah,
and if you are prioritised within that window, then yes, you will get your assurance inspection. And then they will carry on prioritising when the scheduled inspections resume.
A nice point from Kerry, very kindly. Her mother-in-law, who's a childminder, had an inspection a few weeks ago, and they did it via WhatsApp, so she could show them around the room. There you go.
Lovely. Yeah, Ofsted have been very open to different ways of doing things. And at the end of the day, what they don't want to do is to put any additional pressure on. And you can see how that would be a lot of pressure for a childminder in particular, because they're inviting a stranger into their own home with the children present. So they're trying to do everything they can to minimise the impact of these visits on providers. So brilliant. But thank you for sharing.
A question from Julie, which I think is probably resounding around other people as well. What conditions need to be in place for the disapplications to apply? Is it a total lockdown, tier level, or can the setting decide that they apply?
It's
That's a really good point.
Yeah, it's anything that compromises your ability to function, to operate fully. And I think if you do use the disaps and mods, you need to be able to justify, if that's the right word.
And just picking up on your previous point in terms of Ofsted recognise that they are not using this in any way as a punishment way or in any way to disrupt. it is working with you on that. And if you feel as though it's an appropriate thing and you justify it, as Melanie said, then have that conversation and explain why you feel that was the case.
Definitely, definitely. And again, I think I'm going to cover some of these points as we go through the slides. But if you feel that I haven't, please come back to me and we'll go through them. So if we can move on now, Michael.
Yeah, I will. Right, no, I think you'll answer a few of the questions that have come in from this particular slide. Carry on, Melanie, please.
Yeah, so again, the other key things that they're looking for is how you safeguard children. And I would urge people, again, to look at the actions for childcare providers during the coronavirus outbreak, which is the government guidance that we're all glued to at the moment, to see, because there is a section in there about safeguarding children. There are some additional things that actually they're saying that we should be doing, you know, just being aware of children who may not have attended the session, children who were previously vulnerable, but not children in need of intervention, but children perhaps who were on the cusp, and how you're actually responding to them and being aware of those at the moment. Then there's the working in partnership with parents, carers and others. And I think there's that additional emphasis, isn't there, on this as well, because you know, that's been a real challenge, hasn't it, how we've maintained communication with parents and carers and with other services. So I think that's something just that you're looking at through those different lenses. They've got a slightly different emphasis on them. How you're actually offering an inclusive service, so how you might be looking at the barriers to children actually attending at the moment with restrictions in place, and how you're actually looking to overcome those barriers, and how actually you're reaching out to those families that perhaps are reluctant to come at the moment, and actually reassuring them. And it ties in again with that working in partnership with parents. How you evaluate your service and strive for continuous improvement. And I think, and I'm going to mention this later, but this is a real opportunity to shine in terms of leadership and management, because do you know what? You're all out there, you're still standing, you've overcome the barriers that have been placed in front of you, and you've got on with it. And if that isn't good leadership and management, or something that should be celebrated, then I really don't know what is. So and also in the assurance inspections, inspectors will find out how you've addressed any actions or recommendations from your last inspection, whenever that might have been. And again, these are all things that you would expect an inspector to be doing when they visit you. Okay, if we move on again, Michael.
If you don't mind, just pause for a second.
Of course.
There's a series of questions, and I'm just looking at Jasmine, Sangeeta, Claire, by way of example here. They're all asking where will they come on the cycle in terms of I was due one on X day. If you don't mind, everybody, I'll hold those until the end and we'll summarize in terms of what the timeframes are. And again, all of this is very fluid. So it would be wrong to actually say you will get this because that's what it is. So we'll take that as we go forward. One question is, and it's just moved up on my screen, so I can't see it now. In terms of what are the outcomes of the assurance inspection from Claire? What if we'd said about the interim that you get a letter, but it doesn't change your last grade? What's the situation with assurance inspections?
What I will say now, Michael, is that I am very reassured by the fact you're asking all the right questions out there, because these things are coming up on the slides as we move through. So I won't answer that now, because we will be answering it shortly. Here we go. And as if by magic. So the assurance inspection will not result in a judgment of quality, but it will consider whether you are meeting the requirements of the EYFS. So the outcome will be met, not met with actions, and not met with enforcement. So looking at it in that way, if your assurance inspection results in an outcome that says you've met all the EYFS requirements, then again, you're likely not to be prioritised when we return to routine inspections. If it's not met with actions, then again, you you will be a bit further up the list when it comes to the routine inspections. If it's not met with enforcement, then you're likely to be visited quite early on in the inspection cycle in the 6-year window.
Right, I've got an interesting question just picked up, and I'm going to influence it slightly, amend it slightly from Sarah, who's just sending. When we're talking about continuing to meet the EYFS, she said, will cultural capital and curriculum be expected in assurance inspections, as these are big in the education inspection framework? So that's an interesting point in terms of what do we mean by meeting the EYFS if it's not the learning and development elements?
Well, when you think about it, the EYFS doesn't mention cultural capital. It's the inspection handbook that does. So Ofsted will take account of that. But let's think about what cultural capital actually looks like in this new world that we're living in. And I think, you know, when you think about how we introduce children to the awe and wonder of the world, when the walls are closing in at the moment, it's really around how you can continue to do that within the restrictions that are happening. So they won't report specifically on those things, but they will be mindful of them. So, and we should be doing that anyway. We should be thinking about that, because if we think about what it's like for a child currently attending our setting, and we think, as I said, that the walls are closing in on children, aren't they? You know, they haven't got that freedom to play. They're not being taken out to places where we would expect them to be going. So how are we compensating for that? Because that's part of the whole cultural capital agenda.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Okay, so how will assurance inspections be applied? So we've had lots of questions about this, haven't we? So let's see if we can iron out some of these things now. So Ofsted will take a proportionate and risk-based approach to selection that includes what they know about you. So if you've had an interim visit, then it's likely that that will inform that proportionate and risk-based approach to selection. They will also consider the amount of time since your last inspection or regulatory visit, and when your inspection would have been due. So when routine inspections resume, so I think one lady said there, didn't they, that they were right at, it's been 6 years.
Yes, yes.
So again, that will be taken into account. But alongside of that, there will be other things. So, you know, if there's information that's come in about you in the meantime, if a complaint's been received, if the local authority have expressed concerns about you, all these things will be taken into consideration when Ofsted are actually selecting the providers that need to be prioritised.
Just on the complaints one, it was a question that came from Alexandria slightly earlier, and I didn't get an opportunity to bring it in.
Okay.
Are Ofsted still just showing up to settings if it's a complaint-based inspection?
Not unless their risk assessment and the nature of the complaint indicates that actually children are in danger at your setting, that there is a serious breach or potentially a serious breach. So again, it will be proportionate to the nature of the complaint and how Ofsted risk assess what they need to do.
Just a question in terms of the content again, it's just coming from Craig, an interesting one. It's about Ofsted's role in all of this. What's Ofsted's role in further education, further information about the specific things they'll look for on an assurance inspection based around COVID-19 processes or measures in place? Now, presumably that's in terms of welfare applications and things like that. So is that part of the assessment outcomes?
No, not necessarily, no, because, you know, again, Ofsted will take account of some of these things, but it's not a part of their statutory reporting that they want to do. So they will take account of these things, definitely, but no,
Fine. Thank you.
not in any formal way. So now we start to come on to some of the things that I've been thinking through about how we actually prepare, how you can prepare yourselves. So it's the idea of actually all those things we should be doing. They're things that you're used to, but it's just thinking about that slightly different emphasis on them given the current situation. So one of the things that is part of their purpose for the inspection is thinking about what is it like for a child attending your setting at the moment. And I think it's really important that we should be reflecting on this and thinking about, well, what is the general feeling in our setting? What's the morale amongst staff, parents and children? What's it like for a child here at the moment? What are the restrictions? What impact is that having on those children at the moment? So really sitting down and reflecting on that yourself, because you need to be asking yourself the question before Ofsted do. What can or can't you provide at the moment, and how are you compensating, if that's the right word, by providing alternative activities and experience? So that again comes down to that idea of cultural capital. You know, that's something that Ofsted believe is really important for all children. So it doesn't just stop because at the moment we are struggling with the impact of coronavirus, but it may have a different emphasis at the moment. And how are you using observations to inform your practice? So again, when you're thinking about, I know we plan learning and development and we use our observations to inform our planning, but actually what are your observations telling you about what it's like for a child attending your setting at the moment? So those are just a few things from me, and we've got a few more if we move on again, Michael.
Just a question, and I think this is a pertinent one as well. From Mandy, in terms of, are there concerns about inspectors coming from one setting to another? We know other professionals have come in and brought in the virus. My staff and parents would be concerned over this. How long will they stay for an insurance inspection?
Yeah, and they will stay as long as they need to, just as they do in a routine inspection. And I think this is the conversation. When you receive that notification phone call, these are the things that you need to be discussing with the inspector at that time, because they've already said quite clearly that they want to discuss this with you. They want to discuss what the area is like at the moment, what the feeling amongst parents is, you know, what current restrictions have you got in place about visitors coming in, and they will work with you. They're not going to turn up and demand that they come in regardless. They are going to talk to you about that beforehand, and you will have reached some agreement with them beforehand about how they're going to conduct that inspection.
Okay, thank you. Sorry,
Okay.
did you need me to move on? You did.
I think that was it on that slide. So yes, again, thinking about this, reflecting on the areas that Ofsted will focus on. Have you applied any of the DISAPs and mods to the learning and development requirements? Because they will look at that specifically. So they're not looking at the safeguarding and welfare requirements so much. It's about the learning and development. Have you applied the DISAPs and modifications, and why? So being clear about why. And being able to show, because it says very clearly in the guidance that you must still use your best endeavours to do so, to meet the learning and development requirements. So what were your best endeavours? How did you do that? And I've just pointed again you to the bottom bullet there, which is the guidance, early years foundation stage, coronavirus disapplications. Do read that carefully. If you've implemented those DISAPs and mods, read the guidance carefully and just be very clear that you haven't inadvertently stopped doing something that you should still be trying to do.
Thank you.
Okay. And again, that reflective approach to this, how do you currently identify children's starting points? One of the things that Ofsted said that they are going to look at, and I've added this, thinking about their restarting points. So for those children that haven't been with you, maybe parents have been self-isolating or because you've been closed, looking at where they are now. So how did they fare during lockdown, and did they progress or regress in their learning and development? And we've seen and we've heard some brilliant examples of how you've supported children's learning and development during lockdown, particularly through the first lockdown, when you were only open for the children of key workers and vulnerable children. And there was some fantastic ideas of how you supported their learning and development at that time, and how you will have built on that information that you had about children during that time as you reopened fully from September. what are you doing to address any areas of concern for these children? So just being very clear about the information that you've gathered and how you're supporting those children. And a lot of this will come down to mental health and well-being as well, you know, for children that we hear a lot from providers who say, do you know what, the children have come back and they've been absolutely fine, but actually the cracks are now starting to show. So just being really, really clear about how you are tuned into those children, particularly in terms of their mental health and their well-being. And just celebrate how you supported children's learning and development through lockdown and how you evaluated your effectiveness in doing so, because Ofsted will look at your self-evaluation just as they would do in a normal routine inspection. So a lot of your self-evaluation at the moment is surely going to be about, well, how did we do? What can we build on? What worked well? What will stay the same? What changes, you know, have we put in place that actually we think have worked so well that we will keep them? And all that's part of your self-evaluation. Okay, and if we move on, I think we're more or less at the last slide. Oh no, we're not. We've got one more slide to go. Okay, so have the circumstances, so in terms of safeguarding, have the circumstances for children for whom you've had or have now low-level worries deteriorated, and are you clear about the additional safeguarding guidance in the government's actions for childcare providers that I spoke about earlier? So again, there's a worry about these children who were vulnerable in the first place, because as we know, for a vulnerable child, the best place that they can be is in an early years setting where somebody has an eye on them and can report in any changes in their circumstances. So for these children, they've been the hidden children for many of us. So as we're starting to welcome them back in, how are they? Are they okay? Has the situation deteriorated? Really, again, really tuning into these children. And how are you overcoming the ongoing challenges of working in partnership with parents and carers? Because let's face it, parents still aren't coming into the setting. And while some settings have said, you know what, it's so much better when they don't, actually, you know, it does. It does pose a lot of challenges for that partnership working, because it's those incidental conversations that you have on the doorstep that tell us so much, don't they? And again, that thing about self-evaluation to address any actions or recommendations. So thinking about your self-evaluation and making sure you haven't got to have it written down, but can you talk through it? Can you talk to the inspector about how you've self-evaluated? And you might think at the moment, with so many things going on, that the last thing you can do is sit down and do any sort of formal sort of self-evaluation, but recognize the fact that you will have been doing it all the time. So being able to evidence that, whether it's being able to talk about it or showing where you have documented it, if you have. Okay, Michael?
Thank you. Before we get on to that slide, I've just made a note to myself here, and I'm just going to ask you to reflect. Just in some of the many questions that have come in, just a refresher, and if people do want to write this bit down, it might be helpful. The time frame for when we have interim assurance and full inspections, and then people can give some reflection on when they were expecting their inspection to be, but also the fact that this is fluid. So interim inspections are now until
December. So when you think we're rapidly approaching Christmas, so I think we're talking probably about the next week to 10 days, really, and then we will see. We will say goodbye to interim inspection.
And then assurance inspections?
They will commence from January until April, so in effect throughout the spring term.
So the expectation is that from May, we will be back to full inspections as things currently stand?
As things currently stand, yes.
But that obviously is dependent on all sorts of factors which are beyond Ofsted's control as much as anything else. Is that right?
Well, yes, absolutely. Yes. It's a case of watch this space, isn't it, really?
Yep, fine. just a couple of questions that have come in, and I'm reading these cold, so I hope there's no swear words in them. I've read some guidance Ofsted may look at what home learning the setting has provided during closures. Is there any more information on this, and what might they want to see as evidence? From Craig.
Okay, well, this comes very much under your partnership with parents, doesn't it? And how you supported parents with children's home learning during lockdown. So no, they won't be looking for anything specific. I think it will be about you showing how you've maintained that relationship with children and families through lockdown. And I think that will also be reflected in how well children settled back in if they came back to you in September.
Julie has asked the question that everybody always talks about in terms of inspection. She's worried about the documentation that will be needed and expected. Advice.
Ofsted don't like paperwork anymore.
Exactly.
No, Ofsted want to observe practice, and they want to talk to you about practice. You know, they don't inspect anymore in a paperwork way. That when I was managing settings, Ofsted used to sit in the office and read through your policies, your procedures, your evidence folder that we used to keep for Ofsted. They don't do that anymore. And in terms of leadership and management, as you know, in the inspection criteria currently, it talks about how you maintain the well-being of staff. And imposing past paperwork on staff puts staff under stress, and Ofsted will make note of that. They were doing, prior to coronavirus, they were taking into account how you were I don't know, the requirements you had for staff to fill in documentation and the impact of that on staff stress levels. Because we do know that is a stress level for the sector as a whole, and Ofsted have gone a long way in trying to address that by saying, do you know what, we don't want to see your paperwork, we want to observe your practice, we want to know what it's like for a child in the setting, and we don't want to read about that, we want to see it.
Thank you. Paige is on the question again in terms of her first expected. I was expecting my first graded inspection from April onwards. I registered in May 2019. Should I expect a visit before? Again, that's the fluidity of the time frame as it currently stands, Paige. But a more reference one as well from Tracy, and this is interesting. They're currently moving into to be a CIO, a community interest organisation, which changes their registration status. This usually triggers an inspection. Will this still happen? Where are we with registration visits?
Yeah, they've been carrying out registration visits actually throughout lockdown. So again, it depends, doesn't it, on their capacity and on their risk-based approach to this. So it may be that, yes, you are prioritised, but you're not going to be at the front of the list. Yeah. I think this is the thing, when you think about how they prioritise those inspections, you know, there are still going to be people that think, well, we're going to be prioritised, but they're going to be well down the list of priorities.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, because the whole pandemic has impacted Ofsted's operations as it has every other organisation in the country. So don't expect things to be normal and run as smoothly or otherwise. Thank you, everybody. Further support, Melanie.
Okay, so and just to say as well, I know Michael won't mind me saying this, but if anything happens in the meantime as well, and something radical changes again, then we will be there with a webinar for you, just as we are now, before the 20th of January. But if not, on the 20th of January, we will be here and we will be looking at mental health and well-being in your setting. And the reason we chose January to do this, and now to do this, because January is a pretty dire month anyway, isn't it, in terms of the post-Christmas blues. And I just think with everything that's going on, it's a good time to take stock of where you are and how you're supporting not just staff, but children and parents really in your setting. So please join us again on the 20th of January. For any of you that have visited or been part of one of our Connect events, these are informal forums. You can find out about them on our website, and it's just a chance for providers to come together, and we lead the sessions and with maybe a few prompts for you, but actually getting you to talk to each other and sharing sharing best practice, sharing the barriers that you're coming up against, the concerns you have, and we discuss them together in that forum. We've also got our workshops and our virtual classrooms, including new for February 2021, a looking towards your Ofsted inspection workshop, and this will be 2 times 1.5 hour sessions as a virtual classroom, so via Zoom, and we'll be just looking again at what we need to be thinking about and what we need to be doing in preparation for that return to inspection from the summer term. All those details can be found on our Early Years Alliance website, so please visit the website. Apart from anything else, we've got fantastic Q&As on there as well, which are constantly updated. So just make sure that that's one of your go-to places as well for your information. I think that's all I want to say now, Michael.
Thank you. I'm just checking the questions that are coming in. What time, please, on the 20th of January for the webinar? There's 6 till 7. We love our evenings.
We do love our evening webinars.
We do.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, Beverly has said, I just want to say thank you both very much for an informative, well-delivered webinar. You can come again, Beverly, whenever you wish.
Definitely.
From Jennifer, she's completing the purchase of a nursery next week. Congratulations. And will be retaining the management team. I guess this will not trigger an offset as they're already graded as good and I have 20 years experience. Am I right in thinking this is around the registered person, however? Here?
Yes, it is. Don't assume that you're not going to be prioritized.
Yeah, because it is a change of, yeah, I think that's right. Be ready every day. And if you've got that experienced staff and well managed, I'm sure you'll be fine, Jennifer. Lots of thank yous coming in. Jasmine, thank you both of you. Helps very much. So thank you, really enjoyed it. Thank you both much. Excellent. That's very kind of you, Marion, Claire, and all of your kind words. As things are just coming in, for those of you who've been with us before, I usually spend these 3 or 4, 15, 20 seconds waffling whilst people can ask any other questions, but mostly people are saying very kind things. Thank you very much. It's Becky, Victoria, Kirsty, very kind. And thank you both, Becky, that's very kind. It just remains for me to say thank you very much as ever to Melanie, superbly researched and brilliantly delivered. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And I hope, as I say, the recording of the webinar will be available on our YouTube page by the end of the week. And I would just wish you all a very nice rest of the evening. So it's good night from Melanie.
Good night, everybody.
And it's good night from me. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.